So we have an Iranian man, an Irishman giving a keynote speech today. I don't know if it's a joke or not, but we're supposed to be speaking about Pakistan. So apologies for any ignorance that we have in advance. What I thought would be useful is just to explain why is it that an Iranian man in a British firm is investing in a country like Pakistan. What is the kind of story behind it? Why is it that we love a country like Pakistan when seemingly many in the world are somewhat scared by it? And I think I have to bore you with maybe somewhat of a personal story as to how we kind of got here. So like I said, Iranian, born in the UK, and I lived between two kind of polar dimensions. One was the stern and serious father that many of us probably have also lived under, came from a military family, and everything was about seriousness. And then 2 months a year I got the privilege to travel to Iran, where it was kind of the complete opposite. It was my mum's family. I had 7 aunties and uncles, kind of multiples of that, and cousins, and basically the days were just spent endlessly having fun. And it's where you kind of experience what kind of the true nature of love, so to speak, is, and kind of the sort of stuff. And then once when I was 14, I had a good friend who was called Surush, or is called Surush, and he was very smart. And we both liked music. This was kind of both before the age of Spotify. And we engaged in kind of piracy on scale. We found a shop that we paid about $50 a week in rent for, and we basically would just copyright any music that we wanted and sell albums to kind of people, and we made about, I don't know, $400 a week. We were 14-year-old kids. We didn't even know what to do with it beyond kind of having chocolate milk and some pastry. But it kind of set in stone the notion that if you try to put 2 and 2 together in countries where you just, not many times people don't put 2 and 2 together, that kind of some level of economic opportunity could be unlocked. A few years went by, and my kind of teenage rebellion could be defined by a rebelliousness against seriousness. I mean, the sternness of my father almost. And when I was 17, he pulled me aside one time and said, "Look, I don't know what game you're trying to play here, but there isn't a foundation that you think that you can fall back on." And verbatim said, "You have to live as if I'm dead," which is kind of somewhat shocking thing to hear. So I called my friend Surush in the evening, somewhat pissed off. I said, "Look, I've got a place in university next year. My father says he's not paying for it. What the hell should I do?" Surush being Surush, he said, "Don't worry, I know a pharmacy company here in Iran, and they have a shortage of face masks." Ironically, COVID many years later. And why don't you see if you can find face masks somewhere, and I'll sort out the Iranian side, and we'll kind of start an import business. So okay. And this was at the time when Alibaba was in kind of in motion. And so I ordered these samples of face masks. I understood about 2-ply, 3-ply. I didn't know what 2-ply, 3-ply meant. And I took them to pharmacies and kind of said, "Look, which one is this supposedly good?" And basically we started a business where we would buy them for 0.9 pence each and ship them in 20-foot containers and sell them for about 20p. And I wish we kept one container somewhere for COVID many years later, because our margins would have kind of accrued, so to speak. Again, another notion of if you put 2 and 2 together, then things can be unlocked. The years went by and went to university, and what was apparent was that kind of minus Surush's kind of divergence was quite clear economically, not necessarily character-wise, purely because I was an okay seed in good soil, and he was an amazing seed in bad soil. And the notion of that would seem kind of somewhat unfair. And being somewhat kind of driven by commerce or business, so to speak, this idea or this vision that maybe you could aggregate capital and start putting to work in countries to unlock them for what they truly can be, to kind of get that good seed and good soil, was kind of quite interesting. And so that's really what Sturgeon is. It's basically, we try to be somewhat serious about aggregating capital from kind of people we admire, to invest across many different areas to hopefully bring truth to kind of the power of what these countries really are. And we do so because we're young with a vision for kind of the next 20, 30 years. We're not necessarily in a rush to make money. We just want to kind of step by step do the right thing, and hopefully something will be created from it. The notion that kind of numerically that was quite interesting to add to that was, I always was fascinated by this concept that you have a level of GDP per capita in the country, and you have a GDP per capita of the diaspora, right? And what would happen if you overlaid that on top of the reality of those countries, what you probably see is a number that's in the trillions in the gap. Again, good seed found good soil, and it could operate the way it was effective to do so. That was in my mind what the opportunity was, and if one could unlock it, then it's quite a nice proposition. So that's the romantic notion of kind of stuff out the way. So, but hopefully you understand the kind of sincerity and our intent that we want to do kind of serious work. And probably getting onto, let's say, the hard realities, kind of with that sincere in mind, is a few things I kind of jotted down, which is basically our reaction to kind of what we see in the markets of for the past 10 years and what seemingly has worked well and what seemingly hasn't worked well. And these are propositions. These are not kind of definitive kind of conclusions, because nothing is definitive. The first thing I put is this concept of understanding reality. That's a very kind of big notion. Maybe to be specific about it, is that there seems to be this kind of overwhelming notion that has existed in all of our countries for a long time, that we are not comfortable in accepting kind of the reality of what it is that we are. And that we're always looking for kind of explanations from abroad, hopefully that people can explain to us what the hell we should be doing. Well, the reality is, when I'm specifically thinking about technology and VC ecosystems, is that Silicon Valley is vastly different to kind of the reality of Pakistan, any of the countries that we invest in. So there are kind of principles or dynamics that are there to be learned from, but they are not overwhelming truth as to how things should be operated. To be more specific, if you are operating in the US or Silicon Valley, you're operating in a place of abundance of liquidity, and abundance of competition. From a game theory perspective, that implies a very different sort of behavior than countries that have very low levels of liquidity, and you don't have intense competition, right? There is not a rush to kind of do things. There's not a rush to kind of grow arbitrarily. And that in that dynamic, having a better understanding of really what the reality of the country is, to then optimize from that point is kind of more of a rigorous way to go about it. The second thing I put down was showing substance and progress, which is kind of linked to the previous point. You are starting from a position where not only are your local compatriots somewhat cynical of kind of what you're doing, but also internationally they're kind of cynical of the nature of it. Why? Because they basically look at countries that for many years have not optimized the way that they could. It's not for a lack of kind of belief in the potential, the possibility. It's just that there hasn't been much track record of it. And so you have to fight that cynicism with objective progress. Meaning, to be specific, when you are showing metrics, when you are trying to build your business, to do so objectively and to overwhelmingly show some level of progress that is defensible even to the simplest of minds. Because that speaks or shouts louder than anything else. That's kind of something that both investors, companies, founders kind of really, I think, have to take into account. The third is liquidity. And when you're in markets, so to speak, you understand what liquidity really is. If I were to draw a comparison between liquidity in countries like the UK or the US, or maybe a country in Pakistan, is basically countries here have a liquidity crisis once every 10 years. It happens, it's kind of the nature of things. In a country like Pakistan, it's kind of once every 3 years. Okay? But there's nothing wrong with it. This is the way it is. So how should we think about that? Well, it seems to me that if one was to have a strategy to say, in the good times, I try to get liquidity on the best terms, but going into the downturn, I know there will be a downturn. Right? I'm speaking as if I'm a founder. That I have the cushion that when it's the downturn, I can be as aggressive as possible. Meaning, when everyone else is kind of dying away, when everyone else has gone away, you can be as aggressive as possible to consolidate. When the liquidity does come back, people are like, what the fuck, what happened here? And do that through those cycles every time. You learn a lot through it, you consolidate your position through it, you show objective progress through it, and in time, you will have success, if there's some level of intellectual honesty behind it. That's what I mean by kind of understanding the nature of reality. It's if we think that everything is linear, which is kind of what investors feel they want to see, or kind of companies feel they have to show to investors, it's kind of somewhat rejecting the notion of what reality actually is. The fourth point I put was this concept of failures. I mean, it's kind of, people talk about failure so much in this kind of ecosystem, but let's kind of put a framework around it. If you know something about statistics, you know that failures are kind of statistically more likely to happen than not. And so there has to be somewhat of a kind of deliberate attitude towards how one should think about it. And our attitude is simply to rub our nose in it as much as possible, take the lesson, and then move on. Right? There's no benefit to trying to seek some sort of kind of where was their malice, where was their kind of wrongdoing. It's present the lessons learned from it to the broader ecosystem. We all collectively learn and we go on. Bit by bit, we learn, we progress, so on and so forth. The notion of kind of competition or I define kind of competition actually in terms of zero-sum thinking. Zero-sum being kind of the dominant way of thinking generally in our emerging markets. Not because we are bad people, but because we have free liquidity cycles, we have to think short-term. And if you don't eat, someone else eats. But the proposition is to kind of try to think of things in positive sum. And if you have to play zero-sum, that because you've built up the leverage that you have generally through positive sum, that at that point in time, you can do business on your terms. Inevitably, there will be times that you have to be zero-sum. But generally, if you have a positive sum approach, how do we work with incumbents? How do we work together? How do we collectively stop our own stupidity? And hopefully we kind of progress is kind of a good way to go about it. The final part on an ecosystem, I mean, it's kind of somewhat useful to look at it definitionally, is we are an ecosystem. And we have to kind of take our hat off to the pack launch team every hour of every day to basically the work that they're doing to put this together. It's not, I don't know how you do it, but you do it. But let's kind of harness it in the best way that we can. And that's something along the lines of kind of the summary of everything that I've just said. If mistakes happen, let's take it on the chin. Let's kind of move forward. Let's collectively share. Let's stop making collective bad mistakes. Let's just kind of build for objective progress, and we will win, right? And to kind of put a definition on what winning implies is, I did some back-of-the-envelope maths and probably how much liquidity has gone into the kind of VC ecosystem, and probably I'm wrong, but let's say somewhat it's kind of $500 million. And assume no new liquidity comes in. You just have a $500 million pot to try and build something out of. Well, we're in a kind of high growth area, right? So let's say we can compound that $500 million for about 30% for 20 years. Right? 20 years is normally what it takes to kind of build a meaningful business. The number you get to, because of the beauty of compounding, is 95 billion. 95 billion today represents 1/3 of the country's GDP. And probably I'm underweighting what could happen, right? But let's kind of speak a bit more in depth about what is happening there. Is what I saw from my friend Suj and what I saw from kind of everyone else that I meet day by day and at this conference is a hunger that I just do not see in the kind of the developed world, so to speak. And when you have a population that increasingly has smartphones in their hands, well, the speed and compounding of knowledge and learning when it's open access is something that probably we cannot comprehend, but it's happening. If you add on top of that capital that's been allocated somewhat wisely, and you're building systems that are on top of distribution that countries have never experienced, i.e. you have millions and millions of users, then you can unlock a structural efficiency and gain that the likes of which haven't been seen, right? And I'm not talking crazy stuff because you can just see it taking place in somewhat more developed emerging markets. Developed simply defined as kind of higher GDP per capita, where basically technology is penetrating every single element of that society. Not for nefarious reasons, but largely to unlock efficiency, right? And it's been done by the youth. Pakistan seems to have one of the youngest populations in the world. It's also had the fastest rate of urbanization in the world. So you kind of put that all together, and it seems that a beast can be unleashed, and we will be idiots if we don't achieve it. Right? It's all there for us to kind of achieve. I can't read my own writing. The final part that I wanted to just end with was kind of, I was trying to, in advance of kind of preparing for the speech, and the fact that we're in Lincoln's Inn, was to read about Muhammad Iqbal and kind of just try to understand the spirit of kind of what he represented. And the first thing that I read was literally a quote. It's kind of somewhat mystical how it came about, but I think kind of articulates all of what I've been trying to say much more better than I have. And he says something along the lines of, I mean, not along the lines of specifically, be aware of your own worth, use all of your power to achieve it, create an ocean from a drop, do not beg for light from the moon, obtain it from the spark within you. And yes, it's a bit romantic, it's a bit kind of emotional, whatever, But it's the beauty that kind of we have to kind of unlock. And I look forward to nothing more than trying to work with you all to kind of achieve that. So thank you.